Welcome to Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold. I'm a board-certified music therapist, author, and expert on how to use music to relieve stress fast. This podcast is sponsored by McConnell Music Therapy Services, Inc., where they believe in the power of music to transform people and communities. Based in Northern California, their board-certified music therapists support people of all ages and abilities within hospitals, schools, corporations, and communities using music experience to connect, express, and de-stress. Visit them at mcconnellmts.com or their Facebook page, McConnell Music Therapy. This episode of Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold is also sponsored by Dr. Nisi, trainer and certifier of master and executive coaches, because she believes every person, every relationship, every business, and your finances should be extraordinary. Find out more about Dr. Nisi Moore and the Life Coaching Institute at www.drnisi.com. That's DRNEECIE.com. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold. It's so great to be with you, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm really excited to bring you an interview with producer and author Barry Goldstein. Barry and I got a chance to meet and become friends this fall, and he's an amazing human being. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him here, and then you'll hear more about it in the pod. Barry, his musical experience spans like styles, genres. He's a Grammy award-winning producer, and he's composed and produced for TV, film, major labels, top 10 recording artists. But as a performer, he's also composed and produced music for New York Times bestsellers like Neil Donald Walsh, Dr. Daniel Amen, Greg Braden, Dr. Joe Dispenza. And his music is being used in hospitals, hospices, cancer centers, and medical practices. So Barry's also a keynote speaker for medical conferences and a sought-after speaker for New Thought conferences presenting cutting-edge research on how music is being utilized for medical conditions. Sounds like someone I know. I mean, Barry is truly my brother from another mother. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation between two artists who write to heal. And I'll see you on the other side. Barry O. Goldstein, great to have you on the pod.
Tim, great to be here with you. It's
now,
awesome. Not that many people know about that last name.
So for those of you who just heard the intro, of course, there was no O in the intro. So real quick, just for fun, we have to share that story about we're recording. I was going to say filming. We're recording right now on St. Paddy's Day. And so hilarious that there's a story behind Barry O. Goldstein. And I think it would be really funny for you to share it with the audience. So
yeah, well, I grew up in the Bronx, and it was a very culturally diverse area. And I had a group of friends who were Irish. And they decided after many years that they would give me an honorary O in front of my name for O. Goldstein. So for many years, I used that as part of my production name when I was doing house music and hip hop back in the day. Initially, it was Barry O. It was kind of my pseudonym. But I dropped it as I got into more serious pursuits utilizing music. So there you have it.
There it is, folks. There's the rest of the story. All right, man. Well, listen, it is so great to have you on this pod. As I mentioned off camera, if there's anybody I've ever met along my own journey who's more aligned in their own journey, as well as their passion and how they've combined their passion with music, with healing, man, I haven't met anybody more aligned than you. And so I felt like this would be like Vision interviewing Vision on WandaVision. Like, so Vision, how do you feel about quantum mechanics? Well, let me tell you. So I thought this would be super fun for us to dig in. And what I love doing with guests is kind of take us, not play by play, but kind of introduce us to how you were introduced to music.
Wow. So, I mean, going really far back, I mean, I remember sitting on the piano with my mom, who was very, very small in stature but big personality. My mother was literally 4'5", and we had a piano in our house. And I remember distinctly my mom putting her fingers on top of mine and playing the song Yellowbird. And at the same time, she was singing the notes, she was playing them. And I later learned that this is what we call resonance. You know, when we're actually amplifying a tone with that similar tone. My mom was actually doing that and didn't even know it. But that's some of my early memories of just realizing, wow, there's a mystery behind the sound. I remember the notes were kind of like hanging in the air as she was playing. I was just fascinated by how even when she let go of the note, it was still ringing.
Mm.
And, things haven't changed that much. I'm still fascinated by that. All these years later, it's my biggest fascination. So there you have it.
That's awesome. So was piano the first instrument that you kind of were schooled on?
Actually, my sister was more of the piano player.
Okay.
And my sister was given formalized music lessons. And, it was very kind of not strict, but it was more strict than with me. So when they got to me, they realized that wasn't necessarily the best way to go about it. And I learned to play guitar starting from probably about age 10 or 11. And me and my sister were kind of like the Donnie and Marie of, Co-op City in the Bronx. We would do these little concerts where she was playing piano and I was playing guitar. And that's kind of how it started for me. Was as soon as I learned to play 3 chords on the guitar, I was more or less writing songs.
Mm.
And my sister, was, again, more formally trained. So she would read music. I didn't read music at all. She was more technically apt and I was more like just kind of writing from the get-go.
Nice.
Yeah, and that kind of unfolded, as I learned guitar more. I was more interested in, wow, what can I create? From that was always a fascination for me, was that creating something from nothing. An hour ago, this didn't exist. And now it's the start of a song. Like, wow,
yes.
How cool is this?
Yeah, I totally agree. That I had friends who really wanted to be great replicators. And they would study a piece of music, execute that music like flawlessly. Great, cool. Eddie Van Halen's Eruption would be a classic example of this. Because I was self-taught on guitar. I had no interest. It just wasn't like it was wrong or bad. It just didn't resonate with me to be a replicator. I wanted to be a creator. So I totally get what you're saying. And it's funny because as a clinician, as a music therapist, there's a word that I just can't use on stage, and the word is magic. But it's absolutely the way I think about when we're writing and we're creating. It's magic because it was nowhere, and then poof, something is created from nothing. And for me, that's magic. And so it's so funny how like there's that wonder, like, where did that just come from? Where did that just come from? And how did it come through me today? No answers to this day. I still don't have an answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at the spiritual aspects of all this, which I didn't do too many years later, what I realized was that when we create an intention to create, creator comes in to create with us.
Mm.
So however you want to view that, as the universe or whatever you're comfortable calling it, I always feel that we are accessing something beyond ourselves. And you can call that magic, you can call it intention, you can call it spirituality, but we're accessing a field that goes beyond us. And many, many years later, I realized that when I had a song that came to me in a dream, in pretty much complete form, although I had to narrow down the verses because there were so many verses that came in. I was like, I woke up and said, wow, I have to write this down. It was almost kind of like dictation.
Mm.
And I realized, wow, well, I really, I really wasn't part of that creative process. So I had to access something that was beyond myself when I was doing that. And interestingly enough, the song was called Through the Eyes of God.
Mm.
And, during that time, I was creating an album called A Moment. And, I think that I was really kind of wrestling my belief system of spirituality and religion and how I was brought up and, what my father's beliefs were. And it's like, wow, interesting. A song that came through was called Through the Eyes of God. And Tim, the first thing I said to myself and also out loud was, well, this is a really, really beautiful song, but it's not going on my album, Because I was really caught up in like, wow, what are people going to think, if I have a song called Through the Eyes of God that's on my album. And so what I heard back, intuitively was, no, this song is your album. And of course it ended up on the album because I tried for a while. I was like, okay, well, what if I say Through the Eyes of the Universe instead of Through the Eyes of God, or Through the Eyes of Love instead of Through the Eyes of God? And I was kind of going through this whole process of wrestling with trying not to say the word God, in this song. And ultimately, it came down to the songwriter who said, you know what, God just sounds better in the song. So I'm gonna leave it in there. And what I realized was it doesn't really matter what we call it,
Mm.
Because it's more about what we're connecting to.
Yes.
And call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So I came back full circle and, called it Through the Eyes of God because that's how it came through.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about, my perception of what God was in organized religion.
Right.
It was about the connection that came through to share this song with me,
Yes.
in that moment. And it ended up being exactly what that intuitive voice said. It is your album. It ended up being the one song on my album that people connected to universally throughout. And, again, aren't we always clearing ancestral patterns that we think are being handed down to us? Because my father thought he was agnostic. And when that song came through, it was one of my big aha moments that, wow, I don't think I'm agnostic anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, dude. When I was in the middle of being in Blessed Be Thy Name, which was our really heavy, heavy band, at the same time, the band was intensely spiritual, but we wouldn't call ourselves religious. And we were
Right.
like anti-Christian, but we were like, there's this connection. And when I was in the band, I bought a Roland Jazz Chorus, which is just one of the sweetest, amps out there. Plugged my guitar when I brought it home straight into the amp. It created such a beautiful tone that a hymn arose and came out of me. Now I'm in the middle of being in a crazy heavy metal band, and suddenly, like you, there I am, pen to paper, writing a 3-verse hymn called His Love is Everlasting. It had nothing to do with anything I had been working on creatively. It came completely from somewhere else. And it all came like, it wasn't like I had been working on it, I had this riff lying around. Nope. All of it came out at once. I wrote it down all at once. I signed it and I dated it because it was so obvious that there was something going on. I felt like I needed to mark the moment. But when I put my name on it, I almost felt like I needed to write like transcribed by Tim Ringgold, not by Tim Ringgold, because it was not by Tim Ringgold. It came through me, but it didn't come from me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in my own journey, the moments where the creativity is flowing the most is when I'm present to the distinction between those two.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think it's a combination, because even though things are coming through you, you still have your own imprint and your own style and your own perception and understanding of that, so
Sure.
you're interpreting it. It's like a
Yes.
translator,
Yes.
right? So you're translating it and you're explaining it. And, just like different translators might use slightly different words when they're translating. I think it's the same thing. So we have our imprint, even though it's coming through you. You have your own stamp that kind of goes with that. That's
Totally.
how you interpret it,
Yeah.
as well. And I think that it's
Co-written.
probably one of the oldest mechanisms of music. Is part of what I feel is the blueprint of music, is to assist us in being a bridge to have a deeper connection.
Yes.
Whatever that may be, whether it's in a relationship, with a person, or whether it's forgiving somebody for something, music helps us cut to the chase and cuts right to the core of our heart, where we can actually enhance that process. So it's a deeper process than it would have been without it.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back thousands of years, of how music's being used that hasn't changed.
Yeah, totally. Totally. That utility of it as a function of bridge or connector.
Yes.
And you brought up that word connector, and I think connect. So I was in where is Disney World? Orlando, Florida. I'm getting ready to speak at a conference. And the night before, I'm working on my slide deck. I finished my slide deck. I'm very proud of the slide deck. And suddenly this voice goes, "You only need one slide tomorrow." What? You've had these moments where you're just like, wait, what? And I was like, now I've had enough experiences in my own spiritual journey that these dialogues happen in my life. Not, they don't surprise me anymore, but I tune in really quickly, right? When it happens. I joke, one of the phrases I use for a noun is the man upstairs. So like the man upstairs, and like you said, might call it God, might call it creator, might call it universe. The man upstairs says, "You only need one slide for tomorrow." And I was like, "Okay, smarty pants, did you see the slide deck I just created? I spent hours. I spent hours. You're watching. I spent hours on that slide deck. Right. I love it." And then I'm like, "But if it was going to be one slide, what would it be?" And he said, "You just need one slide with one word: connect. That's your whole presentation." And once again, the man upstairs is, brilliant. I'm just like, "Oh, you're so right. Oh, you're always so right." Of course, I didn't change my slide deck because Mr. Ego over here was like, "No, I'm going to just keep my slide deck and not have one slide that everyone trips out over. Why does this guy have one word on his slide called connect?" But that was it. The point was that everything I was going to say for the amount of time I was going to be talking was really, reduced down to this one action, this one outcome, this process of connect. And for a lot of musicians, the context of getting into music is, entertainment. It's entertaining to listen to it. It's entertaining to play it. You go through a little bit of education so that you can enhance your ability to entertain. There's a very cool story in your book about kind of a coming of age moment for you as a guitarist, as a teenager. And any musician who has their heart in their instrument has a story about a very special instrument and how it came into their life. And I'd love for you to share the story of, what story I'm queuing up here. So tell us that story and why that's so powerful.
And you mean the accordion story, right?
Yeah, of course, the accordion story. Yeah. And then, tie it together to later on, so and then tell the rest of the story.
Yeah. It was not an accordion. I'm just kidding. But when I was about 13 or 14 years old, my dad said he saw that I was sticking with my acoustic guitar, and he knew I wanted an electric guitar. So we took off to buy what we thought was going to be a Telecaster or a Stratocaster, because that was what was in our range, to buy. It was about $200 back then.
Yep.
And I was also a big, big Bruce Springsteen fan, and he was playing I think he was playing a Telecaster.
He was playing a Tele.
At the time.
Yep.
So, yeah, I was cool with that. And so we took the car up. My dad was a limo driver. And we took the car up to House of Music in New Rochelle. We lived in the Bronx. And, we tried out a couple of Stratocasters and Telecasters. And the salesman, saw that my father was definitely purchasing a guitar. And he kind of saw that he had one on the hook, so to speak. And he said, let me just show you one more guitar. And he comes out with this guitar. And I remember that he put the case on top of the glass counter and he opened it up. And this hot pink plush velvet case a la the 70s with this unbelievable Gibson Les Paul Cherry Sunburst guitar. And I was like, oh my God. It was like, I can still feel the energy of that guitar when it opened up. And at the time, I was also a big Carlos Santana fan who played a Les Paul, and Jimmy Page, who also played that exact guitar. And I was like, oh my God, that's the guitar that Jimmy Page plays. And Tim, believe it or not, my hairstyle at the time was also like Jimmy Page. I had a big, we called it a Jaffro, which was a Jewish afro then, right? We called it. And my dad kind of looked at me and he looked at the salesperson like, oh man, he knew he was doomed. So he took me aside, and my dad, and he said, listen, if I buy you this guitar, you have to promise me that you're going to stick with music because we can't afford this guitar. And it was funny. He said, your mom's going to kill me. So here it is, this tough guy from Brooklyn, my dad, scared of this 4'5", lady who basically was handling all the finances in our family. And I said, of course, I promise I'll stick with it. And literally, he got me that guitar. He took like 3 credit cards out. He put it on the counter. He had a French horn that he had leased from that same place. And he went and took it out of the trunk. He put that on the counter. And we walked out with this Gibson Les Paul. Which was a big thing, because when I made that promise to my dad, I didn't realize it was like this contract that I was creating with him that would echo years later. Because for many years after I got that guitar, I had looked at that guitar, 5 years later, 10 years later, anytime I was having a financial challenge in my musical career, I would look at that guitar and say, man, I could sell that guitar and and that would be like 3 months worth of rent, But I always remember that promise that I made my dad, and I would look at the name, on the top of that guitar, Les Paul. Every time I wanted to sell it, I would look at it and say, wow, no, I can't sell it. My dad believed enough in me that quality of having a Gibson Les Paul meant something to me. And every time I looked at it, that stamp of Les Paul, little did I know would become this humongous bridge in my life, because literally 30 years after my dad bought me that guitar, I had the privilege of working with Les Paul and co-producing a track called 69 Freedom Special that we ended up winning a Grammy for best rock instrumental in 2005. And there's many story that led up to that, with us going to see Les Paul in the Iridium and kind of courting Les for like 7 years to make this album, which at the time he didn't want to make. He thought he was kind of past his prime. And we ended up making this album with him for his 90th birthday. And it was just like a star-studded album of people on it who really honored Les and all he did to create, multi-track recording, the electric guitar, reverb, digital delay. He invented so many things that people don't know about. But as you said, that you said that was a really cool picture that I saw of you playing with Les on stage. So it really came around full circle. After the Grammy, we went to see Les and congratulate him. We went to the Iridium, and Les asked me, he said, "Wow, yeah, I remember you. You played on the album, didn't you?" Because, this is an album like with 40 or 50 people playing, a few different producers. And so I said, "Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. I really appreciate that you remember." He said, "Yeah, you're a good player. Why don't you come up on stage and play with me?" So what's funny about this story, Tim, that not too many people know, is that getting out of the car to go see Les that evening, my pants button popped on my pants. And, I was like, no big deal. I'm just going to be sitting down and watching anyway. But so the first thing that popped into my head when Les asked me, he said, "Why don't you join me on stage?" I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, my pants are going to fall down on stage playing like with Les Paul. That's the first thing I thought about.
Yep.
And so I came up with the stupidest excuse you could possibly say to Les Paul, the guy who invented the electric guitar, which is, "I don't have my guitar with me." So Les goes, "Well," and Les was a ball buster. He had a great sense of humor. He said, "I work for a little company called Gibson. I think we could find you a guitar." So I was like, okay. My friend Bob, who was the main producer on the album, lent me his belt. And he was a couple of sizes bigger than me. I literally, the first thing I was thinking, wow, I hope my pants stay up. So I was holding that guitar so tight next to me during the whole time that we were playing. We played the blues together. And we were like two kids trading licks. He was having such a great time. About halfway through the second song, he kind of nudged me over and he said, "Stop holding back." And little did he know that I was giving like 1,000%. But I was just worried, that my pants were going to fall down. Yep. And so I was holding it so tightly next to me that he mistook that for me holding back playing with him. I was like, "Hey, this is all I got, man."
I'm holding something.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in that picture that you saw was probably, I would say, the biggest moment in my career as a musician, and fast forward, that 30 years when my dad got it for me, not even the Grammy participation, but it was that moment when me and Les were just laughing and smiling at each other like two kids playing for the first time. It's like, holy whatever.
Yes.
I'm on stage with the guy who invented this guitar, who my dad believed strongly enough, to get me that guitar. And I shared the whole story with Les.
Nice.
Before we played the second song about how my dad bought me that guitar when I was 14.
Wow.
And how honored I was. And it just came full circle, right back to my dad and that promise when we were on stage. So
that is beautiful. And full circle is a perfect way to describe that, bringing it all the way back around again. That is a really, really beautiful thing. Your dad is, smiling, watching that scene, just like, yeah, that's my boy, like,
exactly.
You done exactly good, kid. You did good. Yep. So my dad's also from Brooklyn. P.S. Irish Catholic, and all our neighbors were Jewish, Irish Catholic, and Italian Catholic. That was the hood. So as you're telling this scene of your, where you're growing up and who's around, I'm just laughing because I'm just like, yep, that's check. And my first dream guitar was an Ibanez Gem, Steve Vai model, desert yellow, and the inside of the case is hot pink.
Wow.
Yeah. So the freak show continues. So I'm just like, that's so funny. Yeah.
And I think, Tim, part of the biggest part of the story for me is not just the full circle, but, it's intention and vibration. And, Les was also a stickler for working with frequencies and what he was hearing in his head as well. But it's, I think seeing that name over the 30 years, and associating that with quality,
Yes.
right? And formed a frequency of its own, and an intention and a resonance that created the synchronicity of us working together. And that's my belief of how this all happens. And it is finding frequency and alignment and resonance. And sometimes it takes 30 years to happen. That's the biggest message for those people listening out there who, are kids or in the music business or have spent, an amount of time waiting for things to open up for their careers.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
Sometimes it's the right opportunity and it comes in, and then all of a sudden there's this expansion that happens with it.
Yep.
And it took really that 30 years for me. That was a threshold for me, and a big bridge that happened after that. And one of the most profound things I saw Les say that has been something that has been inbred in my work. When they asked Les, why did you create the electric guitar? His response back was, well, it wasn't there and we needed it. And if you think about that, that is like a catalyst for most inventors. They're trying to find a void, of something that's not there that makes things easier for people or makes it more expansive.
Yeah.
And I think about that in every day. I think about that quote in all of my writing and all of my creative process is, what do we do? Every song's been written, right? Every chord progression has been done already.
All the notes have been played. Yes.
Right. But if we can tap into that which isn't there, but is needed.
Yes.
And bring that forth in our creations, even if we don't know what we're doing in that process where we're looking to create that spark, of something somewhere. Let me be a vessel for something that might assist somebody somewhere in their day or in their listening process. And let me put that intention into my music. And that's really what it is. We can't ever please everybody or aim, well, I'm going to create this or that. But if it helps one person in their day, then I've done my job.
Nice. Yeah, no, I that's beautiful. The artists that I interview on this podcast are artists who are there's a very specific place within the music world that they've found themselves. And that is, they started out in some sort of kind of entertainment and maybe educational context in their career. And then something happened and music changed for them, and their role in terms of like their purpose of creating music transcended entertainment. And I know for you kind of, as a pop music producer, you were in the industry, and then something happened for you. There was kind of like a moment. Would you share that story with the listeners?
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to become a producer, and that was my biggest intention, growing up was, wow, if I could just do this full time, and not have any other jobs.
Yes,
and I'm
the
sure
dream.
A lot of people listening can relate to that. And I did a lot of jobs.
Yes.
I mean, at one point I was working like 3 jobs, and I was waiting tables in the morning for breakfast shift. I was starting my own studio in the afternoon, and I was working as a security supervisor from midnight to 8 in the morning, right? And then getting off work and doing it again. So until I got to that point where I started my studio and I became a producer, and it was awesome. But there also came a lot of pressure with it of literally taking 100 hours of studio time to create a 3 to 4 minute song, and then doing it again the next week, and you had to kind of keep that wheel going. And through that process, it became a job like anything else. And I got burnt out, like really burnt out, and forgot, why I was doing it. And, that kid who was sitting on the edge of the bed at 14 playing 3 chords and was writing, was so excited by it, was kind of lost. And so I decided that I was going to take myself out of that process. And I decided to literally do exactly the opposite, Tim. So, it's like that Seinfeld episode where George decides, he's going to do the opposite of everything he knew in that time, right? So instead of ordering like chicken salad, he orders tuna salad, right? So I decided I was going to do it opposite. And instead of spending 100 hours creating a 5-minute song, I was just going to let the music come through me. And instead of writing it, I was going to let it basically write me. So I call it, instead of composing, it was like decomposing. And so I did a little bit of research as well, online, and found out that our heart at a relaxed state is about 60 beats per minute. So I said, wow, what would happen if I put my metronome at 60 beats per minute with the intention of really reconnecting with my heart? Because our heart is the metronome within our body. And so at the time, I didn't know that what I was doing was called entrainment, which I now know and it's a big part of my music. So entrainment is when our internal metronome, right, or internal source, a time source, connects with something external. So in this case, the internal source being my heart and connecting with the metronome of 60 beats per minute at that time. And what I found was I was taking these hour-long journeys where I just was playing whatever kind of came in. I was targeting my heart at a relaxed state. And my goal was to move out of anxiety and stress of being in the business. And I didn't think, anyone would listen to these pieces of music that virtually have no melody, very like long tones, exactly the opposite of writing a pop song, right? You want a hook and something memorable. This was geared towards having something that was not memorable, so it wouldn't trigger the thought process and take away our attention of that. And, I moved into really, really meditative states composing these pieces. And it really became therapeutic for me, to just write these pieces. And then as I listened back to them, what would happen if I created another layer on top of them? Especially not knowing, because the music wasn't written out, I had to instinctively and intuitively react to those passages that were already laid down. And it created these really interesting harmonics and melodies that people who later listened to it described as otherworldly. And at the time, I was seeing a massage therapist. And she's like, what are these like pieces that I've been hearing you playing? She's like, these are great. You got to like let me use them in some of my sessions. Because at the time, there wasn't anything that was like an hour long, because she was playing them off cassette tapes, right? So they were like 30 minutes on each side. So she had to get like these hour and 20-minute long cassette tapes and put these 60-minute pieces on each side. And she started using them with her clients, and they loved them, because it wasn't a lot of repetitive melodies, and there was no like, nature sounds or birds chirping in the back, which was a lot of new age artists were. And she said, these are great. I love them. My clients love them. And she encouraged me. She said, you have to start sharing these with people. So I called the series Ambiology, which I created the word ambiology. And it stood for me for ambience, the AM part of it, and that effect that the ambience, or a place of beauty or serenity is what I defined as ambience, how that affects our biology, our physical body. And the science of that composing at 60 beats per minute, along with my intention, was part of the recipe that I wanted to come back to my heart in composing those pieces, was all part of the recipe, along with the specific harmonics and frequencies and melodies that were all in there, became part of a recipe that continued, really for the next 30 years in the process, as I delved more into why it was working. Like, why is this working? I know it's working, but I wanted to find out more about why it was working, and I began to research that as well.
Yeah, it's such a great story about being like at the effect of your own music, right? Like not at the effect of someone else's music, and you not writing music that someone else is inspired by, but music that you're like actually, treating yourself, if you will, for lack of a better verb, in the moment, and then others having the similar experience, and then finding out why they're having that experience. Oh, there's this thing, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's real.
There's a distinction too, as you know, as well. That many people confuse music therapy, right? Because you're a licensed music therapist. I'm not a licensed music therapist. So people confuse the two between music therapy and therapeutic music.
Yes.
And music therapy, you need to be with a certified therapist who basically is going to take you through different ways of, creating transformation, utilizing techniques and different ways to do that. Whereas therapeutic music is the music itself is the therapy.
Yes.
And I don't have to necessarily be in the room.
Yes.
And a music therapist might use that therapeutic music
Yes.
within part of their therapy as well. But I think that's one of the distinctions that people need to realize too, because there's a lot more research coming out that is showing benefit of both of those things we just talked about, music therapy and therapeutic music. But when they read that music therapy, helps someone, it's not just music.
Yes.
Yes. It's a music therapist was there, and that was part of the study. So,
well, I just want to say thank you on behalf of all board certified music therapists out there for you being the one to say all of that and not me.
Yeah, no,
and
I think it's important.
That's very generous, and I appreciate that. And just for the rigor, in certain states, music therapists have to be licensed, and in other states, they don't. In the state of New York, where you are, they have to be licensed. In the state of California, where I am, we don't. So there's this national board certification that is kind of the benchmark.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then state by state, we pursue licensure at the state level because licenses are handed out at the state level. And what's interesting is different states either see the need or don't, depending on their state legislature. So some states have licensure, some don't. So it's this thing, but we all, in order to call yourself a music therapist, everybody needs to be board certified. So you go through this board certification exam that you can only take if you've taken 1,200 clinical hours of internship. You can only take those if you've completed 4 years of a bachelor's or an equivalency, a master's, or an equivalency program. So it's a ridiculously rigorous path. There's nothing even close to it in the world of music for therapy. It's like Mount Everest. It's just, it's such a process. And what I think it's important for people to remember that the music itself is powerful. And yes, the relationship between the therapist, the music, and the client can also be powerful, but they can both coexist and do. And how I learned that was when, as a music therapist, I was working with patients in the oncology infusion center at the hospital during their chemotherapy. I'm using my own relaxing, slow tempo, 60 beat per minute arpeggio classical guitar music or my Native American flute. And I'm playing that music live for them to slow down their heart rate, their blood pressure, their respiratory rhythm, their perception of pain and anxiety. One of my patients one day said to me, "Do you have a CD of what you just did with me?" And I said, "No, I mean, because, I come in here and based on where you are and what you need, I craft what you need." And she goes, "Where are you going to be at 2 a.m.?"
Yeah.
And it was really like, I could have had a V8 kind of moment, like thunk. And she kind of hammered me, like, you need to record this music because, and it taught me that not everyone has access to a music therapist, but everybody has access to music. And so it's super important that people understand how to reach for music on their own. So a lot of my career from that day, a lot of my career has been teaching people how to fish. Like, here's how to use music on your own when I'm not around.
Right.
Because after about a year working at the hospital with all the data that we would take, the average number of times I could see the same patient was 1.3. It was like a transaction, like wham, bam, hey, how you doing? So most of the time it became more of an education about how they could use music on their own and reach for music on their own, because that music itself is therapeutic, since there's only 8,000 music therapists nationwide. But sometimes it's like physical therapy and exercise. Physical therapists can prescribe exercise and you have your homework to do when you're in PT, but there's stuff that you need to do with a physical therapist. And you're like, oh, that was really important because I was doing it wrong and I was injuring my back. And
Right.
using the wrong music at the wrong time can also have really negative consequences, particularly for me working in rehab for people in addiction. They can trigger their own cravings with music. And so they do all this great work and treatment by the day, and then they put in their old playlist and now they're triggering cravings and they trigger their own relapse. So music is powerful one way or the other, right?
That's right.
So what I love about your book is you go through, so everybody, Barry, as I said in the bio, is the author of The Secret Language of the Heart and How to Use Music, Sound, and Vibration as Tools for Healing and Personal Transformation. You go through a lot of different ways to utilize music and sound. And I think that's a interesting conversation as well, because there's a difference between music and sound. And something you probably get a lot, that I get a lot, is people will interchange the phrase sound therapy with either therapeutic music or music therapy. And I'm like, no, hold on now. One is different than the other. And I appreciate how much research you did on the impact of sound and music on the heart. My background is in neuroscience, so all of my knowledge is like from the chin up. And so talk to us a little bit about the power of the kind of the heart brain coherence and the role that, tapping into your heart can play in your life. Like, what can that do for somebody for their stress, rather than just this kind of cerebral thought process, more of an embodied process?
Yeah, and we're learning more and more that they're very, very interrelated.
Yeah.
That there is a conversation going on between the heart and the brain. It's not just a one-way conversation. So most of the time when we're talking about the heart, people think that it's really an emotional thing when we talk about being heart-centered, or expanding the energy of our heart. But actually, music can have beneficial effects physically for our heart. And as we were just talking about, some of what we just talked about, entrainment, where you're synchronizing your internal tempo to an external tempo. A lot of research behind that basically shows we can target that. And people do it all the time. Right? You want to relax, you listen to a slower piece of music, your heart rate slows down, your blood pressure can go down as well. You work out, right? You don't want to listen to a slow piece of music. You want to increase your heart rate, right? And, there's also studies showing that faster tempo music can actually create less fatigue during workout. So it's not just slowing your heart down, because a lot of people think music is just to relax the heart. It's really all about, and this is the biggest thing, I always say music's a bridge. Right? Where am I now? Where do I want to go? And what piece of music is going to take me there? Just as you said, now with people, with an addiction process and challenges, you want to always be asking yourself that, because that same piece of music isn't, you don't want that piece of music to take you where you used to go, right? You want it to target a new state, right?
Yes.
And so music can create new memories just as it can create autobiographical memories, which is something that you were really just discussing.
Yeah.
With addiction, those autobiographical memories continue, 30 years later, and create a mechanism to the same type of addictive behavior. So exactly right. You have to ask yourself that question. Where am I now? Where do I want to go? What's going to take me there? But in terms of creating more coherence, something that people don't realize is that our emotions also affect our heart rate variability. So our heart rate variability is the beat-to-beat changes that occur in our heart. And it's really heart rate variability is our ability to adapt to stresses and to adapt to things that are going on in our environment, things that happen in your life on a daily basis, situations, emotional challenges that are going on, and our resiliency to react to those in a way where we're not moving into incoherent heart states. So I'll give you an example. When we're in, and this is a study that was done by HeartMath, when we're in a state of appreciation, we are showing that in ECGs that we're in coherent heart states, right? Smooth, orderly heart rhythm. So if you can see my hand right now, I'm going like this, up and down in a smooth, orderly way. But when we're in anger or frustration, that chart shows that it's jagged, right? And not consistent or not orderly. So knowing that our emotions affect our heart rate variability, our ability to respond to stresses, you can ask yourself the question, well, what is a vehicle that can help me control those emotions?
Right.
Right? And what is the most powerful ways to move into those coherent heart states, or are by triggering those emotions of appreciation, gratitude, kindness, compassion. And nothing does that like music. Nothing can take you there quicker than a piece of music.
Yes.
So, for instance, a piece of music that I shared with you that I said, oh, maybe we'll get a chance to play this during that is a piece of music that I wrote called Forgive. And when we're in a place of forgiveness and it's such a positive, uplifting emotional state, then we could really, really tap into that state of coherence and combine that with the fact that this piece is at 60 beats per minute. And the intention when I was creating it was to move into these smooth, orderly states. Why don't you play a piece of it and let's see how people
cue it up.
Move to that state of gratitude or forgiveness with it.
This is a sample of Forgive.
Wow. So it doesn't take long, for us to move into those coherent states. And, I think that what we need to remember is if you think of our body similar to what goes on in an orchestra, we have all these different systems that are going on in our body, our digestive system, our lymphatic system, our respiratory system.
Yes.
Right? And if you think of it, if all of them, like in an orchestra, played whatever notes they felt like, whatever tempo they wanted to, what would that sound like?
Right. What a cacophony.
It would sound very dissonant, right? It wouldn't sound very coherent. So if you think of the heart as something that's going to regulate those systems and say, okay, here's our defined tempo. You know what? Let's move to a coherent heartbeat, smooth, orderly rhythm of 60 beats per minute. The rest of the systems are getting that information. And when we move to that parasympathetic state, which is when we're in a relaxed state, where we're in rest and digest, we're in rejuvenation, when we're in these smooth, orderly rhythms and we're more coherent, those systems can do what they do best, right? And they can work to move to a more optimal state of health. So I call it, a 4-body system, which is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And all of those together, the whole of those 4 pieces equal health. So if we can start from that place of the heart and just move in, take 2 minutes or 5 minutes in your day where you're listening to a piece of music like that. What do you think is going on at the same time in your brain? Do you think you can be in this peaceful state and these smooth, orderly rhythms and at the same time be in a busy mind that's in high beta? Of course not. And we're showing more and more research. We're calling this neurocardiology, because what's going on is as we're moving into these more coherent heart states, that the brain is producing more alpha brainwaves at that time. And we're showing this, through research now. So we know there's this relationship of, when the mind slows down as well, and you can move to those states where you're in a more peaceful state in your mind, your heart is also moving into slower rhythm. So one affects the other.
Yes. Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And we're showing this on the brain way as well, that studies that are showing that when we're chanting Om, which we've been doing 2,000 years, but now there's studies that show there's a neurohemodynamic relationship, right, which is about cerebral blood flow while we're chanting, and also limbic deactivation. So this is awesome, Tim. They did a study that showed that the control group was chanting S, and nothing happened at all in fMRI studies that actually show what was going on in the brain.
Right.
But when we chanted Om, it showed that the area of the brain that's associated with inner peace was basically activated during that process.
Fascinating.
So, we've known that for 2,000 years spiritually,
yes.
But now we can show it that, through research as well. And so this is where I find it exciting, where science and spirituality are coming together. Because when I present in front of a room of 200 doctors, and they're like, what is this musician doing up here talking to us? And we're getting CME credits for it because I had to provide concrete research that basically show that. And when I was able to show them that through this study, I then asked them, well, would you be willing to stand up and chant with me this chant I created called Om Shalom Home, which weaves Om through different languages. And you see 200 doctors standing up and chanting Om Shalom Home. I mean, that's something to be excited about,
Totally.
But they need to hear the science first.
Yes.
And some of us need to hear it first so we feel safe enough to walk into new territory of chanting Om, because we've been taught that that's something that's woo.
Yeah.
Or that's only something that's done, by certain groups,
Yep.
but we get to a point where it's like, you know what? If these things can help me quiet my mind and move into more peaceful states, especially where we are right now, what's going on in the world, who cares what we call it?
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Outstanding. I'm laughing because I think it's like the, fourth or fifth slide in my slide deck is the bibliography for the whole deck. And it used to be at the end, but then I put it at the beginning, and I've had several clinicians come up to me afterwards going, I really appreciate that slide because I really wasn't listening until you put it up there. And,
Yeah.
and so much of my journey has been having to take this very spiritual experience in my life of music and kind of squeeze it through the physiological, shape on the pegboard in order for clinicians to take me seriously, listen to what I have to say, and really consider the power of, and each one of them, when they take their white lab coats off, each one of them is a lover of music who's had a powerful personal experience with it at some point in their life, right? Either positive or negative, because my old pain management director had a horribly domineering piano teacher as a kid, which really turned him off to music, right? And it was a very powerfully negative experience, so music, positive or negative, it's powerful one way or another. And these doctors and these clinicians, they as humans, they've all had that experience, because as humans, we're wired to have these experiences, and our hearts and our brains cannot not be influenced by that. And I think for me, the working in the ICU with patients in a coma and slowing down their heart rate and their blood pressure and the respiratory rhythm with my guitar, just watching their heart rate as a metronome, and then just playing along with their heart, and then start to slowly slow down my arpeggio, and then watching the numbers just drop. And it's so easy in the ICU because everything is measured.
Right. That's
so
awesome. That's
you
beautiful.
you have that data. It's right there, and that was really profound because they were in a coma. So it wasn't like music preference or aesthetic experience. There was something like purely physiological from the auditory cortex to the brain, to the heart, to the lungs that was happening at a literally subconscious level. And that was when I was first told that was possible, I kind of thought my teacher was a little out there. I was like, no way. I was that cynic. And then I was like, all right, there's the research. It says it. And then here's this other guy doing this research, and he's not even a musician. He's just a cardiologist, and he's doing research, and I'll give it a try. And then when I saw it for myself, I realized that we as human beings, as bodies, like you said, as the four bodies, we are wired to walk this journey of life with music, and to receive music as this tool that helps us get from where we are and where we want to be, whatever that looks like for each one of us.
Yeah, so, I think that's the next step and the next level is, as you said, most people have had a powerful musical experience one way or the other. So the next thing becomes, like anything else, how do we create it and put it into a program?
Yes.
Because we can take it as out of something that is happening to us. I think a lot of people view music as something that happens to us, as a random experience.
Right.
When you have that powerful experience,
yep.
Right? It's something that's happening to us. I think of music as something that's happening in us, not to us. So when we go to that next level of saying, okay, well, yeah, I had these random powerful experiences. How do I utilize that so now that I'm in control of it?
Yes.
And I call that becoming the DJ of your own life. Because, just like DJs are guiding you, and I use the example in my book of how a wedding, how a DJ starts off by playing music that welcomes you into the room, and it's like nice and calm so you can talk over it, right? And then you go into the room where the reception's happening, and all of a sudden they added two more pieces to the band, then you feel that energy going up. And then, then the father comes out and dances with the bride and you're crying, right? And then the music comes down again during dinner so you can talk again. And then all of a sudden, right, it's Cool in the Gang, and right, everybody's dancing
Totally.
again.
Yes.
So, how do we do that? Because the DJ didn't do that randomly. He
Right.
did that guiding you. So you can do that yourself, creating a program as well. And really all you have to do is plug it into your day.
Yes.
Where am I now? Where do I want to go? Think of it like musical nutrition.
Yes.
In the morning to start your day, like breakfast, what do I want to start? What piece of music is going to start my day? Whether it's an up-tempo piece of music, look at your schedule, like what's going on in your day. You have a leadership meeting, play an inspirational piece. It's just like nutrition. It's musical nutrition.
Nice.
You're putting it into your four bodies. At lunch, get up from behind that computer and move around. Program your day so you can rejuvenate yourself, just like food does at lunchtime. And, at night, I think of music as something sweet, like dessert, beautiful end of an evening to bridge your busy day so that you can create a sacred bridge into going to sleep at night, as opposed to just going from high beta and trying to get into delta with it.
Nice.
So if you think of it that way, and that you're the DJ of your life, you can create this musical nutrition and this program. Do that for 30 days in a row, and watch it move from being random to now becoming healing and transformational. And that's the start. You're the DJ. Create your own program with it.
That's it. That's beautiful. We just have a couple of minutes here before we got to wrap up. A shout out in the book. There are several playlists, several listening selections or suggestions. And I love the word suggestions, because music's so subjective, and it's, what works for each one of us, right? So it's like, hey, check this out. And I know some of the most powerful music, I was reflecting on this today, some of the most powerful music that I've listened to was music that I didn't know was out there until like a yoga instructor had it in their playlist, and we were listening to it during Shavasana, and I was like, what was that? And I would go up to the instructor afterwards, I'd be like, get your playlist out right now. We're not moving until I download what that was, right? So it does take some suggestion for us to kind of learn new music and get connected to it. So there's lots of great resources in the book, but there's also a new record. Just dated myself, a new album. I don't even know what to call them these days, Barry.
Right, album, yeah.
Right. Let's talk real briefly about your new album that just crushed it. January, you released?
Yeah, we released a soft release in January, but it was in February where we started really getting it out there. Yeah.
So tell us briefly about the project and where people can find it. What its function is, and
yeah, it's called VASA, which stands for Voice and Sound Activations. It's with a beautiful teacher named Lisa Williams. And she also sings in it and does a guided meditation. And we were blessed enough to hit Amazon #1 in all albums with it, which is kind of unheard of.
Amazing.
And people have been reporting like great sleeping from it. It's a lot of stress reduction. They've reported their pets loving it. So that's been really rewarding. And I'm also releasing a new project with Dr. Daniel Amen that's coming out really shortly, called Your Brain is Always Listening Music Program as well. That's coming out probably as this interview airs.
Wow.
And we've done 4 music programs together, so you can find our programs on Amazon and iTunes as well.
That's right. I saw several of those when I was looking through your catalog. You're incredibly prolific, and it was very
watch
exciting.
your language, all right?
I beg your pardon. But yeah, lots of, and some wonderful, spiritual healers and physical healers, medical healers that you've collaborated with over the years. It's just it's a who's who of people who are doing great work in the world. So for you to be representing music, therapeutic music, healing music in that pantheon is just really, really a testament to your own delivering on your own intention, sticking with your intention. Both your dad and Les Paul would be proud.
Ah, thank you, Tim. That's amazing. And you're doing amazing work in the world. I'm proud of you, and I love the synergy here. We've been saying we're like brothers from another mother. There's a lot of synergy, and I'm sure we're just kind of scratching the surface of it.
Yes.
But yeah, your dedication and your experience in the field and what you're giving here is amazing as well. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. All right. Have a lovely day, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Tim. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold. I've got a couple of resources for you, which you can find in the show notes or you can listen to right here. So check it out. If you enjoy the sound of my voice and you enjoy the sound of my guitar, imagine them put together. Go to sonicrecovery.com and take your very own relaxation vacation, where I take you out of the stress of the present moment and back in time to a time when you felt happy, healthy, safe, and sober, and then walk you through that memory so you can bring back those feelings into the challenges you're facing today. So go check that out. It's at sonicrecovery.com. If you're a healthcare worker in recovery, check out the Music in Recovery Self-Care Guide for healthcare professionals that I created just for you. That's at hcp.sonicrecovery.com. And if you're a healthcare worker and you'd like more information about how to help your patients use music, you can check out the Music Medicine Guide that I created just for you at musicmedicineguide.com. Lastly, if you enjoyed the pod and you haven't done it yet, would you just take a minute to rate and review it? It really only takes about 60 seconds, believe it or not, and it would go a long way to help us make more people know just how good this pod is, particularly for healthcare workers and their stress. Thanks again. See you next time.